Today is about practical resilience. I want to share some of what FMG has learnt from catastrophe events so that you might go away with some ideas of what actions farmers and growers can take now to mitigate risk, adapt infrastructure, and ensure insurance works the way they expect it when they need it. Because a common issue that we see our clients face in these large events is not so much that they don't have insurance, underinsurance is certainly a problem, but the challenge is that there is a lack of understanding about insurance. What are the exclusions? How long things will take? And the bits that are and are not insurable. A risk is a possibility of something bad happening, and it's really important to understand what your risks are, what you can do to manage and minimize them, so that you can have a plan in place if they happen. It's about asking yourself what is important to you, what could go wrong, how likely this is to happen, and what impact it would have on you if it did occur. Then you need to ask yourself what can you do to reduce or prepare for these risks, and how having insurance in place can help by reducing the financial impact of what went wrong. At the Mutual, we're all about advice and insurance because we understand that the value for our clients lies in preventing losses from occurring in the first place. This helps reduce disruptions and losses, which in turn keeps insurance available and affordable. We want to provide you with the practical stuff that helps put the fence at the top of the cliff rather than parking the ambulance at the bottom. There is a lot of talk about insurance and what's changing. What's changing isn't necessarily the physical risk on farm, it's more about our understanding of it. Hazard mapping has improved significantly through tools like LIDAR and updated rainfall modelling. This means that insurers and reinsurance insurers now have much clearer visibility of where events might occur, how often, how intense the event might be, and how many insured assets sit within those hazard zones. Now, that last bit is really important because insurers are now looking at accumulation risk, and this is where their reinsurance comes in. FMG and every insurer buys reinsurance, which essentially is insurance for insurers. If mapping shows increased exposure in a region, it can mean that reinsurance costs can increase or the capacity to get reinsurance may reduce. So when an insurer looks at accumulation of risk and their reinsurance factors, and then you put them together, you may get an increase in insurance pricing. Terms of policies might change, so there may be additional exclusions or additional excesses, and the capacity to take on more policies in the area might reduce. Now, while all of you just heard prices will increase, what this actually means for farmers is that mitigation actions like relocating pumps, improving drainage, or creating a secondary access are becoming more commercially important because they directly influence what these models say about the potential impact of an event, which means it's the managers of the land that are going to control this lever. Now, it can be a bit overwhelming to know where to start. The key is to work out what you're dealing with, how likely it is to happen, and then simplify it down to work out what your plan is going to be. Understanding what stops a farm or business operating is the first step to creating a plan for managing the risk. Most rural businesses aren't stopped by losing a single building. They're stopped by losing services that they rely on and the things that their team need to keep operating, including a place to live, which is why having a plan for these things is so important, whether it is to mitigate that risk or adapt to it. You need to understand what the objectives of the business are and what could stop them in their tracks. Once we know what could go wrong, you can start thinking about the likelihood they'll happen and the impact it would have on the business, including on the people. You can see here on the matrix, there are priorities for the actions you need to take. In simple terms, L1 are the things that happen every day and you'll manage as a part of your BAU. Trip hazards would be a great example of this. Whereas E25 is everyone take action. You're going to have to spend the money and sort it out immediately. So where does insurance come in? Insurance protects us against residual risk. So after all the steps have been taken, because in some situations there will still be a chance it will happen despite your best efforts. The best value for your insurance money is if it's focused on the top left of this matrix. It's for those big events that are rare but have catastrophic consequences. It's easy to jump to solutions, but a little bit of planning is the best way to start to ensure that you are A, looking in the right direction, and B, getting the best out of your spending. Because some risk management is about behavior, while other actions will require some financial investment. So, first up, get yourself a physical property map. Mark things like waterways and access routes, where your prevailing wind comes from, and don't forget about the things that might be next door to your property that could also pose a risk. Second, do a bit of analysis of the risks you face. Ask yourself, what do you rely on the most? What would take the longest to recover from? And what would stop production? Think about what you could do, what risks you could carry yourself, and then what needs to be insured. Also, factor in the risk of doing nothing. If you have a board of directors, for instance, that's a risk in itself, knowing that you face a risk and then not taking action. Now, you've got this big, scary list, and you've stopped sleeping at night with all the anxiety, but it's about bringing it back to manageable by identifying your top 3 vulnerabilities. These are your focus. Spend your time and money on these, and make sure you're creating a culture within your business where everybody knows, understands, and is actually really committed to minimizing the risk. I thought it might be helpful to see what it looks like in practice. Here is a matrix which maps out a few things that could impact a pack house. You can see here in the orange that they've highlighted a focus on power supply as their major vulnerability. There is a really good understanding of what it would mean for them if they lost power, a plan for mitigation, and they also have a really good insurance program to protect them as well. These events happen every year in different forms across the country. In the last 20 years, FMG have supported our clients through 103 catastrophe events and paid out over 950 million in claims settlements to get people back up and running again. Now, there's a few things that come through every event, regardless of what kind. Firstly, many had insurance but didn't really understand how it would respond. And unfortunately, there always seems to be surprises. There was a big variation in the amount of preparedness. While some are full Bear Grylls and ready to sit on their island for months, others became extremely vulnerable within a few days and required a lot of extra support. Many had planned for losing one asset, but not several simultaneously, and this resulted in underinsurance for many. And the last, recovery is long. Some of these have a tail end that can go on for years. Let's have a look at some events that have happened in recent memory so that we can get some understanding. Cyclone Gabrielle provided some really practical learning opportunities for both clients and insurers. Firstly, there was widespread underinsurance of buildings and contents. This only became apparent when claims accumulated across an entire property. It wasn't so much that one building was majorly underinsured, it was that many were a little under, which bit really hard when they were all added together. Farm fencing was frequently underinsured, or storm event caps were not fully understood. Lower value vehicles were commonly undervalued. Clients often thought about losing one quad or the hay rake that were covered particularly under unspecified covers, but did not think about what losing several at once would total up to. Natural disaster excesses and covers were widely misunderstood. Now, if you have a bridge on a driveway that's more than 60 meters from your house, please stop listening to this and make sure you know how it's covered, because it isn't covered by the Natural Hazards Commission. For many businesses, the impact of the disruption and lost profit was what they had underestimated, especially the orchardists, where these disruption losses far exceeded the cost of buildings and vehicles lost in the event. And finally, many clients weren't fully aware of what cover they had, what couldn't be insured, particularly with land remediation, or how the policy would respond in an event such as a cyclone. Fire events have been increasing in recent years, and in speaking to Fire and Emergency, our assessors, and looking at our claims, a few themes have come through across particularly these 3 events. Firstly, they took people by surprise and escalated really quickly. The houses lost, particularly in Lake Ohau, were ones that didn't have defendable space around them and succumbed to ember attack after the fire front had passed. Leaves and gutters, flammable plants, wooden decking, and firewood stacks all played a role for many of the homes that were lost. Access to water supply, Access and water supply were critical factors in the time it took to get these blazes under control. Also, houses on the fringe of rural areas, especially those that had large fuel loadings next door, face the highest risk. Going forward, there will need to be some real focus for these properties to take some actions to protect themselves and take care not to be the source of the spark too, given the fuel loadings. And again, people underestimated what losing everything across a property could add up to, and unfortunately that meant many were underinsured. Kaikoura earthquake 10 years ago. Wow. One of the biggest learnings from the Kaikoura earthquake event was that while liquefaction and ground movement were known about, especially following the Christchurch earthquakes when they seemed to become the new buzzword, the scale of the impact on subsurface infrastructure caught many. Stock water systems, underground power, effluent lines, and mains water were widely compromised. And just to make it a bit more fun, often there wasn't any visible surface damage, so some were really hard to locate. Access was another major pressure point. Livestock logistics and supply chains were heavily disrupted due to the damaged roads. The quake impacted over 20 dairy farms who found themselves not only dealing with significant damage to the farms, but also with no access for milk collection, which meant dumping milk had to be managed carefully to protect both the environment and the pastures it was being spread on. Some key things that we took out of this event were that generators were vital, and those that had them would be the first to tell you that they should be a priority for any farming business. Business interruption insurance, also vital, and this helped with the loss of income from various production impacts. An example of this was increased lameness from walking the herds greater distances. This resulted in animal health costs and extra veterinary support, as well as increased production costs. The land was destabilised, and it's taken years to re-establish access tracks and plantings to stabilise slips for farmers across the region. And this is a cost that sits with the landowner. Also, stock needed access to waterways for drinking water, but this did require concession from councils. And on reflection, it would have been great if more was known about this prior to the event, so the process was simpler. Possibly a good thing to include in your planning if you think this could be a factor. Now, if I was meeting with my rural manager this week, there is a few things I'd be asking them about and making sure that I have a good understanding of, because it's really important that insurance is understood and that you're not discovering these things at claim time. Here are some practical examples of what you can do to reduce risk. The main thing is that whatever action you take, the aim is to reduce operational disruption, because this is something insurance only goes so far to protect you against. And again, it's about going back to what are you prioritizing in terms of your own business and the impacts that you have some control over. My closing point is that the more you do before an event, hopefully the less you're going to need to do after it. Insurance is certainly one part of resilience. The mitigations you put in place, big and small, will all have an influence on how impacted you are and how quickly you get up and running again after the event. Understanding the balance between what you transfer to an insurer and what you manage yourself through investment and risk management, or choosing to carry that risk yourself, is the key to getting the best out of your insurance spend and getting the best outcomes for your business. Resilience starts with knowing what risks you face, understanding what it is that brings you to your knees, taking action with mitigation. Don't put it on a list of things that you're going to get to, crack on and get into doing them. Knowing how your insurance will respond, because the best time to understand your policy is not when you're calling your insurer to make a claim. And finally, every day is a school day, right? So take the opportunity to upskill yourself. This is an area that's often overlooked. We often hear stories in these events about how farmers are so resilient and just got on with it. What this actually is a reflection of the fact that they have a lot of practical skills and experience that they can put to good use after an event. And of course, a big tractor helps too, doesn't it?